Report date Galactic Standard 7249.3. Classification Incident Report. Filed by Major Rax Plutonics, 7th Border Defense Fleet. Subject First Contact Incident Unclassified Species. Look, I know nobody's going to believe this report. Trust me, I barely believe it myself, and I lived through it. But regulations are regulations, so here goes nothing. I'm stationed at Outpost 749, one of those forgotten metal boxes floating on the edge of civilized space that Command pretends is strategically important. You know the type, just enough firepower to make pirates think twice, but not enough to actually matter in a real fight. The kind of place where the most exciting thing that usually happens is when Private Nebulous manages to not burn the synthy coffee. But yesterday was different. It started like any other day on this rust bucket. I was reviewing the morning reports, thrilling stuff about malfunctioning waste recyclers and requisition forms for new air filters, when Lieutenant Kyra Starmist burst into my office. Now, Kyra's usually the most composed officer on this station. The type who'd probably file a formal request for permission to panic during a reactor meltdown. So when she came in with all four of her eyes wide and her scales practically glowing with anxiety, I knew something was up. "Sir," she practically squeaked, "we've detected an unauthorized vessel approaching the station." I took a long sip of my synthy coffee, grimacing at the taste. Pirates again? Tell me it's at least something more interesting than those Zorblax raiders from last month. I'm still filling out paperwork from that incident. No, sir. Kyra's upper eyes blinked rapidly, while her lower ones remained fixed on her data pad. We don't know what it is. The scanner readings don't match anything in our database. Now that got my attention. In my 15 cycles of service, I'd seen pretty much every type of ship that crawls through this sector. Show me. The holographic display flickered to life, showing what had to be the strangest vessel I'd ever seen. It looked like someone had taken spare parts from a dozen different ships, welded them together while blindfolded, and then painted the whole thing in the most garish shade of orange imaginable. "That's certainly unique," I managed, trying to maintain some semblance of professional dignity. "Have they responded to hails?" "Yes, sir. That's the other thing." Kyra shifted uncomfortably. "They're broadcasting on all frequencies, in what appears to be music." She activated the audio feed, and my office was suddenly filled with what I can only describe as rhythmic noise, punctuated by someone screaming about highway zones and being thunderstruck. I quickly shut it off before my auditory membranes could start bleeding. Right, I straightened my command sash, trying to look more confident than I felt. Clearly we're dealing with an unknown species here. Alert the first contact team, power up defensive systems as a precaution, and someone get me a translation matrix that can make sense of whatever that noise was. "Already done, sir." "But there's one more thing." Kyra hesitated. "The vessel's pilot is requesting permission to dock. Says something about needing to use our bathroom." I stared at her for a long moment. They crossed into restricted military space, broadcasting what might be a sonic weapon, just to use our waste disposal facilities. "Apparently so, sir." I sighed deeply, something I'd been doing a lot lately. "Well, this should be interesting. Prepare boarding bay 3, full security detail. And someone wake up Dr. Lumix. I have a feeling we're going to need our xenobiologist for this one." If I'd known then what I know now, I would have taken my next vacation cycle early. Very, very early. To be continued in the next incident report segment, assuming I can figure out how to explain what happened next without sounding completely insane. Supplementary report: initial contact. Index 0800 to 1100 Galactic Standard Time. The thing about first contact situations is that there's always a mountain of protocols to follow. We have manuals, we have training simulations, we have emergency procedures for every conceivable scenario. But somehow, nobody ever thought to write a protocol for what to do when a lone alien shows up in a patchwork ship asking to use the facilities. I dispatched our scout team to boarding bay 3, led by Lieutenant Starmist. Private Jax Nebulous was practically vibrating with excitement, which wasn't exactly inspiring confidence. The kid had only been stationed here for 2 cycles, and his biggest accomplishment so far was setting a new record for most cafeteria trays dropped in a single shift. Remember, I briefed the team. This is a standard first contact procedure. No sudden movements, no aggressive postures. And for the love of all 7 moons, Nebulous, try not to drop your weapon this time. That only happened twice, Sir Nebulous protested, his antenna drooping slightly. The ship docked with surprising precision for something that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts. Our security feeds showed the airlock cycling, and then, well, that's when things got weird. The being that stepped out was bipedal, covered in some kind of synthetic blue fabric, and wearing what appeared to be a device made of reflective materials over its visual organs. But the most striking thing was its constant display of teeth. On any other species, this would be a clear sign of aggression, but somehow it didn't feel threatening, just unsettling. "Hey there," the creature called out, waving one of its upper appendages. "Name's Nathan Blake. Sorry to drop in you unannounced, but when you gotta go, you know what I mean." Our translation matrix took a moment to process this, and I could see Lieutenant Starmist's scales shifting through various shades of confusion. "Greetings, unknown entity," she replied formally, reading from the first contact script. "We request clarification on your stated purpose and biological needs." Nathan Blake, if that was indeed its designation, made a strange sound that our sensors initially registered as a malfunction. It took us a moment to realize it was some form of communication. "Look, I'll make this simple," he said, doing that teeth-showing thing again. "I've been hauling cargo through this sector for 3 days straight. My ship's bathroom is busted, and I spotted your station. I know this is probably against about 50 different regulations, but I figured it was worth a shot. I even brought some premium Earth coffee as a thank you gift." Dr. Lumix, who had finally arrived and was frantically taking readings, nearly dropped her scanner. "Sir," she whispered, "according to these readings, this being is composed primarily of water and carbon, and it's carrying an unknown substance it claims is for consumption." That set off about 12 different security protocols at once. Unknown substances? Possible biological contamination. This was exactly the sort of thing that got entire outposts quarantined. "Halt," Lieutenant Starmist commanded, raising her stun baton. "Place the unknown substance on the ground and step back slowly." Nathan Blake looked confused. "It's just coffee, folks. Premium Colombian blend. Though I guess if you haven't had coffee before, maybe we should start you off with something lighter. Wouldn't want to overwhelm your system on the first go." Private Nebulous, in what I can only assume was a moment of panic, decided this was the perfect time to demonstrate his infamous clumsiness. He stumbled forward, his weapon discharged, and a stun bolt hit the container in Blake's hands. The resulting explosion filled the docking bay with a brown powder that immediately set off every contamination alarm in the station. Through the chaos, I could hear Blake's voice. "Ada, man, that was my last bag of premium roast. Do you guys have any idea how hard it is to get real coffee out here? The synthetic stuff just doesn't cut it." That's when things really started going downhill. Lieutenant Starmist, following quarantine protocols, ordered her team to stun and contain the potential biological hazard. 3 stun bolts hit Blake directly in the torso. He sneezed. Just sneezed. Then he looked at us with an expression that our cultural database couldn't quite classify. "Okay, I get it. No coffee lovers here, but seriously, was that really necessary? Those tickle, you know." Tickle. Our most advanced non-lethal weapons tickled him. Sir Lieutenant Starmist's voice had risen several octaves. Standard stun settings appear to be ineffective. Request permission to increase to maximum output. I should have said no. I should have ordered everyone to stand down and tried to talk this out. But when you've got a potentially hostile alien showing resistance to your weapons, standing in a cloud of unknown brown powder, while all your contamination alarms are screaming, well, let's just say protocol tends to win out over common sense. "Permission granted," I said, words I would soon regret. What followed was perhaps the most absurd security response in the history of our fleet. Maximum strength stun bolts, gravity restraints, and even our experimental neural disruptor, all of them either bounced off, tickled him, or in one particularly memorable case, made him compliment our fancy light show. And through it all, Nathan Blake just kept asking if he could please use the bathroom. To make matters worse, the brown powder had gotten into our ventilation system. Several crew members reported feeling unusually alert and energetic, followed by what Dr. Lumix would later classify as extreme psychological enhancement. In other words, half my security team was now bouncing off the walls on something Blake called caffeine. Look, Blake said, casually brushing off another stun bolt. I can see we got off on the wrong foot here. How about we all calm down? I'll use your facilities. And then I can help clean up this mess. Maybe explain the wonders of coffee to you all. Though judging by how your friend there is literally climbing the walls, you might be getting a crash course already. He pointed at Private Nebulous, who had indeed somehow managed to scale the docking bay wall and was now hanging from a support beam, giggling uncontrollably. That's when our base commander, Admiral Zena Voidstar, decided to make her appearance. And let me tell you, she was not happy about being woken up to deal with what the alert system was calling a caffeinated invasion. Supplementary report pursuit log. Time index 1100 to 1400 Galactic Standard Time. Admiral Zena Voidstar's arrival should have been an intimidating moment. She's a decorated veteran of 3 space campaigns, has a reputation that makes hardened pirates surrender at the mere mention of her name, and once stared down a quantum beast without blinking. But when she stormed into the docking bay, her usually immaculate commander's uniform wrinkled from sleep and her cranial spine still drooping, the first thing she did was sneeze. What in the name of the void is that smell? She demanded, gesturing at the brown powder still floating through the air. Coffee, Nathan Blake answered cheerfully, still brushing off stun bolts like they were nothing more than minor annoyances. And speaking of which, any chance I could get directions to that bathroom now? This is getting kind of urgent. The Admiral's scales shifted to deep purple, a sign of either extreme anger or caffeine absorption at this point. It was hard to tell. Major Plutonics, explain why there's an unknown alien in my docking bay, why Private Nebulous is swinging from the ceiling, and why everything smells like a planetary roasting facility. I opened my mouth to respond, but Blake beat me to it. Oh, that's my fault, he said, raising his hand like a student in class. I was just trying to make a friendly offering of coffee, but your security team here seems a bit jumpy. Nice light show, though. Those stun weapons really have some pretty colors. Reminds me of a rave I went to back on Mars. The Admiral's eye stalks twitched. Secure that alien immediately. Full containment protocols. What followed was quite possibly the most ridiculous chase sequence in military history. Nathan Blake, still politely asking for bathroom directions, simply started walking toward the nearest corridor. Our security teams deployed every non-lethal weapon in our arsenal, which turned out to be about as effective as throwing paper airplanes at a battleship. The magnetic restraint field bounced off him with a pleasant humming sound. Ooh, tingly, he commented, continuing his casual stroll. The paralysis ray washed over him without effect. Is that some kind of scanner? My friend Harry would love to study this tech. The gravity amplifier, our newest security measure, increased local gravity by a factor of 10. Blake just adjusted his stance slightly. Wow, you guys have artificial gravity control? Cool. Though you might want to calibrate it better. Feels a bit heavy in here. Lieutenant Starmist, who by now was showing signs of severe coffee exposure with her scales rapidly cycling through rainbow colors, deployed the capture foam. The expanding orange substance completely engulfed Blake, who simply walked through it like it was a mild inconvenience. Hey, this stuff reminds me of the time I got slimed at a kid's party, though it's a bit stickier. The Admiral, watching our most advanced containment technology fail spectacularly, made a sound that I can only describe as a strangled squeak. How is it still moving? Nothing can resist all our containment measures. Actually, Dr. Lumix chimed in, her voice slightly higher pitched than usual due to caffeine influence. According to my readings, the subject's biology is fascinating. Their cellular structure seems to have natural resistance to our standard neural disruption techniques. And their muscular density combined with something called adrenaline makes our gravity controls practically useless. Blake, now covered in orange foam but still walking, nodded appreciatively. That's pretty neat. But seriously, about that bathroom. The chase continued through our corridors, with increasingly desperate security measures failing one after another. The emergency force fields? He walked right through them, commenting on the pretty blue sparkles. The sonic disruptors? Apparently they sounded like something called dubstep to him. Even our last resort, the quantum entanglement snare, just made him sneeze again. Private Nebulous, still under the influence of the coffee, had taken to following Blake around while bombarding him with questions about Earth music and something called memes. The rest of the security team wasn't doing much better. Half of them were either giggling uncontrollably or spouting philosophical theories about the nature of existence. Did you know one guard mused while failing to aim his stun baton properly, that we're all just stardust thinking about itself? Deep, man, Blake replied, ducking under another restraint field. But seriously, I really need to find a bathroom. This is getting critical. The Admiral, who had been running alongside me trying to coordinate our failing containment efforts, suddenly stopped dead in her tracks. Her scales had turned an interesting shade of green that I'd never seen before. Wait, she said, her voice unnaturally calm. Are you telling me that we've deployed our entire security arsenal, exposed half the station to an unknown chemical compound, and caused enough damage to drain our repair budget for the next 3 cycles, all because this alien needs to use our waste disposal facilities? To be fair, I pointed out, he did try to tell us that from the start. Blake, now standing at a junction of 3 corridors and still cheerfully ignoring the various weapons being deployed against him, turned to face us. Look, I don't want to be rude, but this is getting kind of desperate. I've been holding it for hours, and that coffee from Pluto Station isn't helping. So either point me to the nearest bathroom, or things are about to get really awkward for everyone involved. That's when Admiral Voidstar did something I'd never seen in all my years of service. She started laughing. Not her usual dignified chuckle, but full-blown, scales-changing colors, antenna-waving laughter. This, she gasped between fits of laughter, is going to make one hell of a report to command. Major Plutonics, for the love of all that's sacred in space, someone show this human to the nearest waste disposal unit before we end up with an actual biohazard situation. And that's how Nathan Blake, covered in orange containment foam, followed by a caffeinated Private Nebulous still asking about Earth culture, and trailed by a string of failed security measures, finally got his directions to the bathroom. But of course that wasn't the end of our problems, because just as Blake disappeared into the waste disposal unit, our long-range sensors picked up something much, much worse than a human needing a bathroom break. Supplementary report station status update. Time index 1400 to 1600 Galactic Standard Time. Remember how I mentioned things getting worse? Well, it turns out that when you have a station full of caffeine-addled crew members, a human who just needed a bathroom break, and an incoming unidentified fleet, things can go from bad to absolutely ridiculous faster than a quantum jump. The long-range sensors were showing a fleet of ships approaching pirates by the look of their energy signatures. The same Zorblax raiders I'd mentioned earlier, probably back for another attempt at our cargo holds. Normally, this would be a serious but manageable situation. But nothing was normal about this day. Admiral Voidstar was trying to coordinate our defense from the command center, but it's hard to maintain military discipline when your crew is experiencing their first coffee high. The tactical officer was drawing smiley faces on the sensor displays. The weapons specialist was composing poetry about the beauty of particle beam trajectories. And Private Nebulous? He had somehow convinced half the security team to start a dance party in the main corridor. Status report, the Admiral barked, her scales now a fascinating mix of stress purple and caffeine green. The good news, Lieutenant Starmist announced, barely suppressing a giggle, is that our weapon systems are fully operational. The bad news is that nobody can aim straight because everything is hilarious. That's when Nathan Blake emerged from the bathroom, still covered in bits of orange containment foam, looking considerably more relaxed. Whew, that's better. Hey, thanks for finally letting me use your facilities. I know this whole thing got a bit out of hand, but what's everyone looking at? The main screen showed the approaching pirate fleet, now close enough to make out individual ships. Blake walked over, leaving a trail of foam droplets, and squinted at the display. "Oh hey, I know those guys. They tried to rob me last week. Not very good at it, though. Their targeting systems are horrible." Admiral Voidstar's eye stalk snapped toward him. "You've encountered these pirates before?" "Sure. They're the reason my ship's bathroom broke in the first place. Their shots missed completely but hit my waste recycling system. Really inconvenient timing, too. I was in the middle of my morning coffee." The Admiral's antenna twitched. "You're telling me that the same pirates who've been terrorizing this sector can't even hit a civilian cargo ship?" Well, Blake scratched his head. "Dislodging more foam, they did hit my ship. Just not anywhere important. I mean, who aims for the bathroom? That's just rude." A thought struck me. "Sir," I said to the Admiral, "what if we—" "Absolutely not," she cut me off, then paused, looking at Blake. "Although—" Blake grinned, showing those teeth again. "You know, I do owe you guys for the bathroom break, even if you did destroy my coffee and try to capture me with all those fancy toys. Want some help?" Before the Admiral could respond, our communications officer, who was now spinning in his chair while making whooshing noises, announced, "Incoming transmission from the pirate fleet." The main screen flickered to life, showing the Zorblak's raid leader, a particularly unpleasant character we'd dealt with before. His smug expression faltered slightly when he saw Blake waving cheerfully in the background. "Oh no," the raid leader said, "not you again." "Hey buddy," Blake called out. "Still having trouble with those targeting systems? You know, I could recommend a good repair shop. There's this great place on Europa." The pirate leader's face turned an interesting shade of pale. "This station is under your protection." "Protection?" Blake looked confused. "Nah, I just needed to use their bathroom. But they did try to shoot me with some really cool weapons. Want to see?" That's when Admiral Voidstar had what I can only describe as a caffeine-induced moment of brilliant insanity. She stepped forward, somehow managing to look dignified despite her color-changing scales. "That's correct," she announced, completely straight-faced. "This human is our special security consultant. Would you like a demonstration of his capabilities?" The pirate leader looked at Blake, who was absent-mindedly playing with a ball of containment foam like it was a toy, the one who walked through our heavy weapons fire like it was a light rain. "The very same," the Admiral confirmed, warming to her role. "In fact, he just finished testing all our new security measures, personally." Testing? Blake caught on quickly, grinning wider. "Oh yeah, the gravity thing was fun. Kind of like that time on Jupiter's moon when I carried my ship's engine block up a hill. You know, for exercise." I watched as the color drained from the pirate leader's face. Our crew, still riding their caffeine high, had fallen silent, watching the exchange with barely contained glee. And the Admiral continued, "He brought us a secret weapon. A biological compound so powerful that half my crew is currently experiencing its effects." On cue, Private Nebulous chose that moment to backflip across the command center while humming something he called space dubstep. The pirate leader's eyes widened. "We seem to have made a navigational error. We'll just be leaving now." "Wait," Blake called out. "Don't you want to try some coffee first?" The transmission cut off so quickly it left static in the air. We watched on the sensors as the pirate fleet executed the fastest retreat I've ever seen, their engines leaving trails of panic-induced plasma discharge. That's when the real revelation hit us. In all the chaos, none of us had bothered to properly scan Blake's ship. Dr. Lumix, finally coming down from her coffee high enough to remember how to use her equipment properly, did a full scan. "Sir," she said, her voice filled with disbelief, "that ship, it's not a simple cargo vessel. Those modifications, the power readings, it's a test pilot vehicle for their species' first attempt at faster-than-light travel." Blake looked slightly embarrassed. "Oh yeah, about that. I probably should have mentioned it earlier. But you guys seemed pretty busy with all the shooting and containing. I'm actually part of Earth's experimental FTL program. We're testing new drive systems. And well, I really did need a bathroom break. The coffee helps me stay alert during the long test flights, you see." Admiral Voidstar sat down heavily in her command chair, her scales settling on a pale shade of disbelief. You mean to tell me that humanity's first FTL test pilot, carrying experimental technology that could revolutionize space travel, stopped at our military outpost to use the bathroom? And share some coffee, Blake added helpfully. Though that didn't go quite as planned. Final report segment: incident resolution. Time index 1600 to 1800 Galactic Standard Time. There are moments in every military career that define you. Moments of great heroism, strategic brilliance, or diplomatic triumph. This, however, was not one of those moments. This was the moment when I had to explain to command exactly how our border station had accidentally become humanity's first official contact point because their test pilot really needed to use our bathroom. So Admiral Voidstar said, her scales finally settling back to their normal blue hue as the caffeine wore off, "You're telling me that ship of yours can break the light barrier?" Blake, now cleaned of containment foam and sitting comfortably in our conference room, nodded. "Well, that's the theory. We're still working out some kinks. Like the fact that the drive system keeps frying the waste recycling unit. Something about quantum fluctuations and plumbing don't mix well." "And the coffee?" Dr. Lumix asked, still taking readings with her scanner. "Is that some sort of special fuel for your enhanced human capabilities?" "Nah, I just really like coffee. Keeps me alert during the long test flights. Though I have to say, watching how it affected your crew was pretty entertaining. I've never seen anyone do a triple backflip while reciting quantum mechanics equations before." Private Nebulous, who had finally come down from his caffeine high, blushed a deep shade of purple. "I don't suppose we could just forget that part." "Forget it," Lieutenant Starmist exclaimed. "I already uploaded the security footage to the station's entertainment database. It's going to be this year's holiday party highlight reel." The truth about the situation was both simpler and more complicated than any of us had imagined. Humanity had been working on FTL travel in secret, using a combination of technologies that, according to Blake, were inspired by something called science fiction movies and what he described as that thing where you're in the shower and suddenly have a brilliant idea. "We figured it was better to test it quietly," he explained. "You know how it is, one failed experiment and suddenly everyone's worried you're going to accidentally create a black hole or something." "And did you?" the Admiral asked, looking concerned. "Create a black hole? Nah. Though we did temporarily turn Bob from engineering into a quantum ghost for about 15 minutes. He's fine now, just occasionally phases through solid objects when he sneezes." The Admiral rubbed her eye stalks wearily. "So what happens now?" "This is hardly the standard first contact protocol for either of our species." Blake shrugged. "Well, technically this isn't official first contact. I mean, I was just looking for a bathroom. Though I suppose showing up at a military outpost, causing a security panic, introducing your entire crew to coffee, and accidentally scaring off a pirate fleet might count as something." "Don't forget the part where we tried to capture you with every weapon in our arsenal," I added. "Oh yeah, that was fun. Those containment devices of yours are really interesting. Any chance we could trade some technology? You show me how your gravity manipulators work, and I'll show you how to make a proper cup of coffee." And that's how humanity's first official trade agreement was negotiated over a newly replicated cup of coffee, properly calibrated this time to avoid causing any more accidental dance parties in a border station's conference room. The official report to command was creative. Admiral Voidstar somehow managed to spin the entire incident into a successful first contact scenario, complete with tactical demonstrations of mutual defensive capabilities and cultural exchange of biological stimulants. She even managed to make the pirate fleet's retreat sound like a planned joint military exercise. The unofficial aftermath was far more interesting. Within a week, we had established proper protocols for human ships needing emergency bathroom breaks, surprisingly common, as it turned out. Dr. Lumix began a fascinating research project on human biology, particularly focused on their inexplicable resistance to our weapons and their ability to metabolize caffeine without achieving spontaneous consciousness expansion. Private Nebulous was promoted to head of our newly established Human Cultural Relations Department, mainly because he was the only one who understood most of Blake's references. He's currently writing a guide titled Understanding Human Idioms: Why Taking the Piss Doesn't Actually Involve Theft. Lieutenant Starmist modified our first contact protocols to include a section on distinguishing between actual threats and humans who just need to use the facilities it's become required reading at the Academy. As for me, I got a commendation for outstanding adaptation to unprecedented diplomatic situations, though I suspect that was just Command's way of saying good job not starting an interspecies war over bathroom access. Blake still stops by occasionally, testing new variations of the FTL drive. He always brings coffee, though now we have proper containment protocols for it. The stuff's been classified as a controlled substance, following what we now call the Great Caffeinated Conga Line incident of Station 749. The pirates never came back. Apparently, the story of a human who walks through weapons fire while complaining about coffee spread quickly through the criminal underworld. They say there's now a warning in the Zorblax Raiders manual about avoiding any station that has humans aboard, especially if they're smiling. Final note for the official record in light of recent events, I would like to formally request that all border stations be equipped with properly labeled bathroom facilities for all known species, including humans. I would also like to suggest that we revise our definition of potential weapons of mass destruction to include something called espresso. End report. P.S. If anyone needs me, I'll be in the newly established coffee lounge. Private Nebulous is teaching a class on something called latte art, and I've been assured that the risk of spontaneous dancing has been minimized to acceptable levels.